It's really very simple. You just throw it away.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the B-Zone Educational Series, the video series on the history and the teachings of Adida Samraj and the play that he had with his devotees. And tonight in the studio we have Terry Patten. Many of you know Terry from previous interviews, and also his work in the world of integral spirituality.
Integral spiritual practice, integral worldview, integral philosophy, yeah.
Oh, good. And Terry's on his way to Boulder, Colorado tomorrow for a big session with Ken Wilbur and
Diane Musho-Hamilton and Jeff Salzman. We're leading the Integral Living Room starting this coming weekend.
Oh, good. Well, we're fortunate to catch him. He's a good friend of mine, lives in the local area here. And one of the things that Terry was a very big part of back in the early days of 1973 and 74 was writing this book, or co-authoring or co-editing this book with another devotee, Samuel Bonder, The Garbage and the Goddess, which was a period of Adida's teaching demonstration, can you call it?
That's right.
And so it was a period during the early 70s when there was a lot of, even in the Trungpa world, the Buddhist world, there was a lot of wild, crazy things happening at that period of time.
It was it became infamous early on because it was during this time that Adida did two major things. One was that he manifested exaggerated spiritual transmission in very intense ways. It created wild experiences in people. So, and the other was we partied. We used what he called the dietary accessories.
Okay. Which was not uncommon in those days because dietary accessories and other substances were widely used not only within the general culture, but in the specific areas of the teachers that were being brought into this country at the time, because other teachers at the same time were also bringing what was being used in the culture, like substances, LSD, marijuana, other forms of ecstasy, if you will, to bring a demonstration to their teaching and also the teaching of the devotees. But I wanted to ask a little bit about when you said transmission, or he manifested a transmission, because that's an integral part of this play that he
central.
Essential. And in one talk I remember, he said he was better than LSD.
Yeah. And I can vouch for that. I tried both.
So maybe could you speak a little about spiritual transmission for those people who haven't been around somebody who has that kind of capacity, or siddhi, I think is the name given to it by
Indian in the context tradition. Of every move that he was making. He was in a time, he was 34 years old, and it was, I think that something of his guru function was still coming on board, and a big new dimension of his capacity to manifest his unique function was arriving. And he was in this time, in a way, amazed by himself. You know, like he was becoming himself anew. He was incarnating his spiritual dimensionality in ways that were surprising even him.
Right, he talks a lot about that, that this whole period was really a true evolution even within his city powers of teaching work that he took on, basically.
Yes, exactly. So he was just very playfully bright. It was a quality of kind of amusement and amazement, but then kind of daring and wildness too, like discovering this and letting it rip. Like he was going ahead and letting the energy that he was, this activated life force, you might call it Shaktipat or activated Kundalini, but it's not merely that. It was really, he had given this remarkable talk just a couple of months before that, the three dharmas, in which he really described in a very particular way the characteristic of his siddhi, which he compared to the dharmas of the navel, the heart, and the head. The navel being associated with Gautama, the ajna being associated with Krishna, and the heart being associated with Jesus.
So yeah, he says that this is Buddhism is associated with desire, and Christianity is associated with love, and the Hindu Dharma or Krishna is associated with the self.
That's right.
Right.
And also with Vijna, with Buddhi, with the faculties associated with the head center, faculties associated with the heart center, and the immediacy, the Buddhism, sort of like what we know with Zen, just like a very existential, vital awakening. But what he was describing is that his siddhi had all of those qualities. It was not just something that would open the third eye or open the heart or break your navel, that it was a siddhi that included and expressed all of those qualities. And he also had used the terms the bright and the thumbs, the bright having to do just with this centerless, peripheryless brightness that circulates freely down from above and all the rest, and the thumbs, which is this crashing down intensity that overwhelms everything, that is just all of that expressing the energies of these three centers and of these great paths, because these siddhas and the paths associated with them, I mean, all these paths are expressed in different aspects of the Buddhist, the totally elaborated Buddhist lineage, and so that nothing is limited to these, but he was expressing that all of these are included and that his work was the expression of all of this. And all of that was just coming online for him. He was expressing it, and then he was demonstrating it. So it was a matter of communicating the ideas around it, which he did before I even arrived in a basic way in that talk, The Three Dharmas. Then communicating the willingness for him to enact it as theater, which he did in this talk, The Guru Enters Devotee, and then through unreasonable, undeserved grace, I happened to arrive in a very...
Right at the beginning of it.
Right when it all really began to take off. So I spent just a couple of months with him there in Los Angeles in a time in which he was so available to everyone, and he was romancing everybody in a sense. He was drawing us into the field of beauty and love and kind of joyous buoyancy that was there every night, very playful. And we would gather with him, not every single evening, but more evenings than not. I don't think it was a regular thing. There was always a spontaneity to it. But something like 4 or 5 nights a week, we were there at the La Brea ashram gathering with him. And he read his novel, or he gave a talk, or we had a party, or, wild things, just kind of silly stuff. We had a leg wrestling contest, we had a naked party one night. We had wild goings on of one kind or another, but the real through line wasn't any of the particulars of that. It was this kind of joyous love affair that we were all having with him. And he was communicating this way of satsang, which is the love relationship with the Guru. And in the midst of that, he was just so happy. Here he was 34. He was just beautiful. The pictures of him at this time are the radiance and the spiritual fragrance that anyone who's ever been in his company knows that there's a quality of profundity and depth and consciousness and grace that characterized him throughout his life, from his early days until his death. But in this early time, there was a particular ordinary human grace that, yeah, there you go. That's what he looked like when he was transmitting. That's him in his full transmission mode. And essentially, we were all of us having this falling in love experience with God, unable to believe. It was an experience that is kind of like, we've died and gone to heaven. Oh my God! It's as if Jesus Christ had incarnated in our own time and in our lives, and we somehow had lucked into being in his intimate circle, and there we were gathering with him. We instituted this period of partying and wildness in which he really didn't restrain himself at all, and everything was thrown. It was 52 pickup. Everything was thrown in the air, and it terrified everybody, but it helped us feel this quickening, like, oh my God, right now something big is happening. And he was already beginning to manifest very powerful siddhi into the space. Like we had occasions, even that talk, Guru Enters Devotee, people, he transmitted enough life force that people were, kind of blown open by the force that was moving through them. They might take on mudras, the life force moving, or they might cry out. But after the Saturday Night Massacre, a little bit at the Saturday Night Massacre, although it was more of a talk with laughter than it was full of energy manifestations with people screaming or being overtaken. It was the moment, though, in which he more or less said, we've got our place. We can live as we please here. We have privacy. We're not going to have the police or the neighbors hearing what we do. We can make noise. We can live as we please. And we're going to do it. We're going to use this occasion to live freely, to be wild, and to kind of have a blast, but a blast of a divine party, a divine liberated existence. And that was set in motion with this particular talk, the Saturday Night Massacre.
And what I'm remembering from other stories of that period, but it wasn't just all fun and games or wild parties. There was some really true ego death kind of experiences. I remember that Sal was brought into his company for a period of time because he was experiencing some pretty difficult times because ego was being obliterated in this period of time.
Well, a lot of people were being very much, he was, because of what was happening with him and because of the degree to which we had fallen in love, like we really had said in our hearts, I recognize the divine in a way I've never seen the divine before. And my previous conceptions of things do not hold what's manifesting here before me. And this is more attractive than anything I've ever seen. And a level of energy is running through me now. I'm actually feeling my mind is filled with light. I'm kind of powered by a supercharged power source that is beyond anything I've ever experienced. I'm ecstatic in a whole new way. This is so compelling. I'm going to follow this into what may be a whole new life. This was pretty much the experience of most all of us gathered around. It was a fairly small gathering. I mean, when I first came, there were only 40-some devotees, and I think it was very rapidly growing. By the time we got to Persimmon, it was close to 100. It got to be 100 with, in the midst of the Garbage and the Goddess period, and it grew rapidly during those years. But what was really at the core of it was not so much the parties or even the energy manifestations. It was this quality of divinity it was this quality of intense spiritual fragrance of this love relationship to him, and of him kind of explosively coming into the fullness of his own divine manifestation. He gave talks during that time like Sex, Laughter, and God Realization. Actually, that was a little later, but the spirit of him just being outrageous and letting his energy flow with this quality of humor and discovery and amusement and delight and affection. It was all a blessing, and the quality of delight and devotion and willingness to endure discomfort in the midst of that attraction. You're willing to endure discomfort. So the displacement from our comfort zones, our displacement from our normal ego orientations was spontaneous. We were experiencing ourselves living a revolutionary level of divine transmission and divine contemplation and devotional opening that was we were young people. We didn't have lots of sophistication. Some of us were scholars of the traditions to a certain degree. And by everyone's estimation, we were all so blown away and so taken that everyone's, we would have our conversations with one another, kind of trying, are we crazy? Let's have a reality check. But everybody's reality checked out. Even though things got wilder and wilder and wilder, at some level it was like a madness when he would be really pouring the energy out and people would be just shrieking and the energy manifestations would be rocking through us. And I had lots of kriyas, these spontaneous kind of movements where the head would turn or the spine might arch and we'd cry out. There would be so many of these, and some of us who were particularly available, what he would call either having an open spine or maybe a hole in our navel, that we would feel these more readily. Some people were relatively solid and had fewer of these experiences. Right. They were not the point. He always made the point that they weren't the point. It was a remarkable time because he was awakening as the fullness of his spiritual expression and discovering it and exploring it and using it as a teaching demonstration and in a sense surrendering it all. He was using it in order to he had a kind of extravagant and sacrificial, like, let's just give it all, let's live it all, let's love it all, let's pour it all out, and let's let go of it, and let's give it away. And maybe we even lose it, and that's okay. Like he didn't, if he died, if this extravagant use of this siddhi took him to some other place, he was willing for it to go. He trusted his own process. He could feel the divinity of his own process. This is my best interpretation of it. I mean, at the time, it was only that he would go deeply into high spiritual states. He would go deeply into occasions of teaching. He would go deeply into celebrating and being wild. He would go into whatever was right, but he would be doing it in a way that had a quality of discovery, of exploration, and something new kept coming into the field again and again and again. This quality of novelty and of discovery was very, very fresh, very alive. And the kind of display of possibility that was expressing itself for the first time was a big part of our experience.
So when I hear that, it's one of his criticism is that omega principle that seems to be inherent in a lot of, could be interpreted as that this is just an omega principle going out to manifest whatever can be manifested in this creation of endless creations, and the whole principle of the God of and the garbage stuff is that all of that is just stuff,
Right.
and there's something prior,
Exactly.
before. And also the lessons of this, from what I understand, have to do with establishing some kind of a sadhana, because this is just wild and free, crazy energy happening in a kind of a unformed community, a wild bunch of pimps, whores, and I don't know, other
Neurotics.
adjectives that he, terms that he used to describe some of the people who came at that time, and others who were watching from a distance because they didn't want any part of this kind of crazy stuff, because a lot of the community around, and the spiritual community around Bubba Free John or Adida or Franklin Jones at that time looked at him as a very dangerous character. And somebody who...
He said he was a dangerous character. He said he was here to, for one thing, he said every man's life is the avoidance of relationship. There was a fundamental quality of spiritual fragrance that, and this is the thing about Adida that is impossible for those who really experienced his presence to adequately communicate, but that really everything he did, every gesture, every movement, I had my problems with many things about the way that all played out. I was by no means just an uncritical Kool-Aid drinker, but one cannot accurately understand the whole quality of any of these things without factoring in the fact that there was a quality of spiritual fragrance, of grace, of beauty, of divinity that pervaded everything he did, every gesture, every word. I mean, it was literally, it felt like a fragrance around his body. He was so remarkable. That quality is inexpressible, and it's impossible to make that credible to someone who hasn't had the direct experience, because it seems like an adulatory projection, and
right.
There's no independent way to offer a verifiable, objective measure of this. But the phenomena of around him are pretty consistently misunderstood, because that dimension is taken out of the skeptical person's perception, and the whole thing makes no sense without it, because that's the most prominent thing about every single story, is that it's lit by that.
Right. Which is a problem for many people, because it's a paradox, because even within that seemingly divine communication, even with Trungpa being inebriated to the point where he can't even walk on stage, people are today still, and also all the abuse that happened with all the gurus in that early period of time, it's just incomprehensible to, and it cannot be squared by any logical way in mind to give authenticity to it, to justify any of it. It can't be justified. It can't be legitimized. It can't be put in any moral. It's a divine paradox, and just cannot be fully squared in the moral mind of
That's right.
the culture.